So if you just looked at his resume, Naaman was a pretty happening guy. He was the commanding general of the armies of the king of Aram. Better than that, he was a successful commanding general of the armies of the king of Aram. He had led successful campaigns. He had helped to expand the king's territory. He was known as a mighty warrior. He was the kind of guy, when he wasn't off fighting campaigns, that when he was home should have been fending off invitations to the cocktail circuit. Except he wasn't. Naaman wasn't the guy anybody wanted to have come over to his house, because he was also what the Hebrews called Masoreh. Meant he was a leper. Now, the ancient Hebrew word that's used, Masoreh, is not exactly defined by modern standards. Leper is the best translation we have, but leprosy in this case might not have been strictly what we call Hansen's disease today. Masoreh took in a whole constellation of infectious skin diseases. So what he had might have been any one of a number of disfiguring diseases of the time and place. Some researchers have even put forth the idea that a type of deadly mold is included in that category. So he was scaly. He was covered with sores. He may have even been covered with mold. But whatever it meant when he was to say that he was Masoreh, the upshot was that Naaman was afflicted with a disease that had what doctors now technically call a high ick factor. Nobody wanted to be around him. So for all of his acclaim and success, all of his power, he was still unclean. He was probably a lonely man. His uncleanness would have resulted in society basically keeping him at arm's length. Even as the general of the armies, he would have provoked whispers in the king's court and on the streets. So when his wife's slave, a captured Israelite woman, when his wife's slave let slip that, oh, by the way, I happen to know of somebody who could cure that illness, he latched on to that in a heartbeat. It caught his attention because even though he was a battle-hardened and tough warrior, the idea of living out his life as a kind of a scaly outcast was not appealing to him. And the chance to be welcomed back into society was so strong that he felt he would take just about any chance. Now, being in the army of Aram did not include health insurance as a benefit. So he had to pay for the cure. And what the Old Testament tells us he was willing to pay tells us how much he wanted it. Because with him, when he went to get the cure, he gathered up a fortune of precious things. Translates out to 750 pounds of silver. 150 pounds of gold. And we're told 10 suits of fine clothing. Which always makes me laugh a little bit. And with that all, he also took a letter from the king of Aram to the king of Israel. asking him essentially to extend all possible professional courtesy to my general as he is there to get cured of leprosy. And when he presented this letter to the king of Israel, of course, the king of Israel freaked out because he figured he was being set up. He had seen what had happened to some of the other kingdoms that had crossed Aram's path. And we're told that he tore his garment, which was a way of showing anguish. But Elisha, student of Elijah, inheritor of a double portion of Elijah's spirit, Elisha heard about this, and he heard that the king had torn his clothing. And he immediately sent a message. And he said, "Don't worry. Have the Aramean come to me." And the king happily passed that message along. And Naaman, he said, "You know what? The guy you want to talk, not me, the guy you want to talk to is Elisha. Get out a map for him, told him where he lived. Happy to see him go." But then after all of that, when Naaman rolled up with his crew in front of Elisha's house, he didn't exactly get the welcome that he had been expecting. And instead of Elisha coming out and working a miracle, by this time he had no doubt heard of the many miracles Elisha had performed. But instead of seeing Elisha come out, instead Elisha's servant comes out to the curb and says, "Elisha said to go and dip yourself in the Jordan 7 times. So there's more drama at this point. It's Naaman's turn to freak out because he's come to Elisha expecting a cure for leprosy, and he's told, "Go take a bath." And he storms away. That's how he hears it anyway. And he storms away, and he's not going to do what Elisha said until one of his servants points out, "You're here because you wanted a cure. You're here because you trusted Elisha, and if he'd asked you to do some huge thing, you would have done it. All he's asking you to do is to go dip yourself in the river. So if it's that easy, why not do it?" And Naaman did. And just as a side note here, this is a really interesting view of the importance of servants in the Bible. Because it's a servant who first turns Naaman on to the possibility of being cured. And then it's a servant that convinces Naaman that he really ought to try what Elisha said. So centuries, this was probably 600 or 700 BC. Centuries before Christ ever walked the earth, Scriptures were already foreshadowing his teachings about the importance of being a servant. Because it's servants doing the right thing that advance the story. It's the servants who convince others to find and embrace God, either directly or indirectly. That wasn't the point to the story. So Naaman goes, he bathes in the Jordan, comes out, no scales, no sores, skin like a baby's bottom, apparently. He's restored to health, and he is thrilled beyond belief, and he immediately hurries back to Elisha's home, and he stands before the prophet, and he says, "Dude, everything I wanted, everything I have, it's yours. I brought 1/2 ton of gold and silver and whatever you want from Men's Warehouse, I guarantee it." I am thrilled beyond belief to be cured. At which point Elisha just kind of kicks at the ground. He says, oh, shucks, Naaman. I'm just God's servant. You don't need to give me all that stuff. And Naaman, who's still thrilled at being cured, he's just basking in this miracle healing. It's at this point that he says something that struck me as weird. Because he says, Elisha, if you won't let me pay you, at least let me take with me 2 mule loads of dirt. If you're like me, when you first read or heard that, you thought, well, that seems kind of peculiar. First he wants to pay him, then he wants to take dirt. So look at it again. Won't paraphrase this time. It says, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offering or any sacrifice to any god except the Lord. Doesn't clear it up. In all of his gratitude, in all of his thanksgiving, why would Naaman say, will you at least let me take some dirt? I did some research. Apparently the U.S. Army has specifications for such things. And according to them, it turns out a pack mule can carry between 150 and 300 pounds of cargo. So the question then is, why did Naaman ask to take home 400 or 500 pounds of dirt? And it turns out, and this is really no surprise, it turns out that this has something to do with the social context of that time and place, because most nations were at least partially defined by the god they worshipped. And the gods were generally identified with the territory of the nation. The idea of God having a locality, the Jews had that. They revered the Temple Mount as the place where God came and rested when he came to earth. And they viewed the land around them, their land, their territory, as God's place on earth. They believed very strongly that God was linked to their promised land, and many nations around them had that same belief that if I live here, this is my God. So knowing that, we then understand that what we were really reading about there is Naaman's epiphany. Because by being healed, by dipping himself in the Jordan at the prophet's request, Naaman suddenly realizes that he's been worshiping a false, or at least an inferior God. And once he realizes that, now he wants to worship Elisha's God, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever you want to call him. And he believes that in order to do that, when he goes back to Aram, he's going to have Israelites or Israeli soil for God to be there with. He wants to take 2 mules full of dirt so he can have a place to worship, where he can stand on God's sacred ground and praise him. And Elisha, because he comes from that same social context, understands this perfectly. He says, take it. Go in peace. And that's exactly what he did. Now, our understanding of God since then has evolved. We understand that God is not local to any particular place. We don't to stand on sacred ground to worship God. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we could, or maybe if we would, have a spot where we could go and say, I know God is here? A spot that was special to us. A spot we could be and say, I know God is with me here. Wouldn't it be great if we each took a step back sometimes and looked at what God has provided for us? God has done for us without our ever even asking. And we're thankful. Every sunrise, every sunset, every meal we get, every person who's ever crossed our path, every everyday miracle that we forget is a miracle because we've seen them so often that we've lost our sense of wonder. All of that around us. Wouldn't it be good to have a time and a place where we could connect with God? We consciously and deliberately and intentionally were thankful, like Naaman, like the leper in the gospel reading. If we took the time to connect and say, thank you, God, thank you for healing me when I was broken and finding me when I was lost and loving me even when I was unlovable. I think we forget to do that sometimes because we don't have that sense of place. This is where I can go and be with God. We kind of lost that. I don't know about you, but there are days when I get so caught up in life. The calendar is full, and I'm juggling too many things at one time, and I'm concentrating so hard on what I need to do that I forget who I need to thank. Naaman had his dirt, his bit of God's country, to remind him of how lucky he was and to give him a place to connect and say thanks. What do you have? What do we have that does that same thing for us? After we were first married, one of Rachel's friends, she had a friend named Claudia. Claudia was different. Would that be fair?
What do you think?
She was very spiritual. And she had this place that she would go in the woods. She called it, I don't remember her elf tree or her spirit tree or something like that, but it was a particular tree in one of the forest preserves. When she felt the need to connect, she would go there. And I remember one day she took us out there and she showed it to us. And it didn't look like much, it was a tree and there was a tree trunk next to it. But you could look at her face and tell this was special to her. I think each of us needs, maybe each of us ought at least, to have a place like that. Have a place where we can go and say, the rest of the world should be out there right now. I'm just going to be here and be with God. And we need a time where we can set everything else aside and say, you know what, this is my time with God. If I were a betting man, and I'm not, I would guess that most of us aren't that intentional about it. I think if we were, our lives might be a little bit better. So my challenge this week, or my suggestion at least, is that we do something intentional. Find a place and a time where we can set the rest of our lives aside and just reach out to God. Not here. Being here is good. We need it more than just once a week. So find a place. Find a time where we can reach out and feel God's loving touch in our lives. And find a place and a time to be thankful for what God has done. Be thankful for who God is shaping you to be, even with all of the stuff happening in your life. We don't thank God because He needs our gratitude. He's the creator of the universe. He doesn't need our gratitude. But we need to thank Him because that helps us to remember who we are. And it helps us to remember the source of all that we have. Be intentional this week about finding a time and a place to reach out and be with God. And be thankful. Because God works miracles every day. And you're one of them. Amen.